Hi guys. So I will have covered some of this already in my video on why I stopped taking LSD, but I thought I'd give more of a general overview because I had a lot of good experiences on LSD as well, and I don't see it entirely negatively. I guess I first did it about 8 years ago, something like that. It was a while ago, and immediately it was like it was fun and also quite weird, like it could get weird really at the drop of a hat. And I was at that time, it was one of the worst times in my life, definitely. Me and my ex were living in this kind of weird place in London, and we had we lived in a really small bedroom that was like for one person, and we were fighting a lot. And I went into this stuff in more detail in my MDMA video, but we were doing a lot of MDMA basically, and just like having a crazy time. It was really bad. And in general, I was like using too many drugs and too much alcohol and stuff. And I don't remember the exact timing of it. I know around that time I got really into the music of the Beach Boys. I don't know if any of you guys are into the Beach Boys. Like when you're a kid, you think they're just like the Beach Boys, and then I sort of realized that they have a lot of like really good psychedelic music and stuff, and they're really interesting. I mean, if you don't know about them, I'd highly recommend like reading up on Brian Wilson and stuff, because they're very different to the way that they're like typically marketed as in mainstream culture. They're like really like they had a really interesting period, sort of concurrent with when the Beatles started to really like develop into a psychedelic group and stuff. The Beach Boys kind of did the same thing, but Brian Wilson had a lot of mental health problems. Some say from taking LSD. I don't personally buy that myself. I think he was kind of convinced of that by people around him. I would argue there were other things he was doing that were much more harmful. Anyway, doesn't matter. But yeah, I was getting into their music, and it was around that time. Started tripping. I don't remember exactly how the first trip was, but I remember listening to one of their albums. I think it was the Smile Sessions, and I was just like, I just couldn't believe it. Like, I couldn't believe how good the LSD made the music sound, and it was like fascinating. It was genuinely fascinating to listen to it. It was just, it was like the sound was like, I can't describe it really, but to say it became like three-dimensional, it doesn't quite accurately describe what I mean, but it was like you were hearing sounds within the sounds, I guess. Like you were hearing the song that you'd heard before, but you were realizing there was all this stuff that you didn't hear. Not just more detail, but more like character to the song, like more like, it was like there was shit living in there. There was like stuff going on that it was just suddenly audible to you when it hadn't been before. And there was this tone to everything, like emotional tone, I mean, or I don't know how to describe it. It was really incredible and fascinating, and I just remember just being completely transfixed. And that aspect of it remained throughout all my time taking LSD. Like, it was incredible to listen to music on, like absolutely incredible, in the way that weed is when you first start, but more, like a lot more. I can't imagine there's really a better way to listen to music, to be honest. And so it was cool in that way, and it was also like really funny. Really funny stuff would happen on it. It was hilarious. Like, just I don't know, like I felt like it made us like funnier, and it made everything that happened funnier as well. So there was a lot of like laughter on it and stuff, but then it would just get weird so easily, and we were having a very weird time. Like, so it was very easy for things to get very weird very quickly, and I think that set the tone for me doing LSD. I know that can happen anyway, but I think that set a tone for me where like things would just switch suddenly. It would just be like, we'd be having a laugh, and then someone would make a comment, and the other person might misinterpret it quietly, and then the other person would pick up on their weird vibe, and then it would just spiral into like it was somehow a small thing. It's like a crack in the windshield, and it would like just the whole night would suddenly become chaos. It was like a ball would start rolling, and we didn't really have the necessary skills to control it. I was a bit better at just becoming centered and calm during it, or just letting go. Basically, I wouldn't necessarily say I became calm, but I would just be like, all right, fuck it, like if I'm gonna have like a nightmare trip, I'm gonna have a nightmare trip, whatever, and like I would just accept it. She had a slightly harder time doing that and would fight against it, and that was it was not good. So yeah, I remember early on, I don't remember if we'd done it much at this point, but a friend of mine who I hadn't seen for ages, who lived in a different place, he came to stay with us, and it was, in a way it was fun, in a way it was a really bad time, because we were having a really bad time like right before he got there, and it was quite a dark time in our life, basically, and it had all been quite bad like immediately before his arrival, and it was a really bad vibe, and he was having to stay in this bedroom that we lived in that was already too small for 2 people, and he was staying in there with 3 of us, and so it got pretty weird, and I was very uncomfortable with the whole arrangement, and I felt like it felt weird to be going through all these personal issues between us, and then to have an old friend who I mostly associated with like comedy and laughing and humour and shit, to have him there. It was really weird. But we had some really fun trips, actually. I remember one where like it was just it always seemed like when we did it, like crazy stuff would happen. I think I talked about this, and other people in the last video said they had a similar experience, like in the comments, where just crazy shit would happen, like really weird, like lots of crazy stuff in a row. We went and like one time we found this mural, and we were just like roasting it for like an hour, and it was like really funny. And then like all these weird people kept coming along, and like weird shit kept happening, and a guy like wheelied right in between all of us, and then we met this weird dealer, this weed dealer, and it was all like, I think he was the guy that did the wheelie. I don't remember. I remember we went into this like alleyway, and there's all this crazy shit started happening. All these people started appearing, and like weird stuff was going on, and we were just like crying, laughing the whole time. And it was so funny. I remember thinking like, this is like the funniest shit I've ever seen in my life. Like this is like the most I've ever laughed. We were dying from laughter. And like one time, I guess it was the same night, we saw apologies, I think maybe I've talked specifically about this stuff before. We saw this little boy, and he was like out by himself, and it was really weird because it was like 10 p.m. Which is, at first it was just so funny, like because we were tripping, and just the idea of this little boy being out by himself, it was really fucking funny. Like, why is there a little boy there? And then we walked up the street a bit, and we were like, should we do something? And then we were like, well, we're not really in a fit state to like help, because we're tripping balls, and like it's gonna be a bit weird if we go over to him. So we all just kind of walked off, and then we were like, should we be ignoring the fact that there's like a child who's on his own behind us? Like, shouldn't we do something? And then we were like, well, it's too late. We walked off, and then we saw like his parents like running, or some adults running around down the road, like screaming and crying and shit. And we were like, what the fuck is going on? And it put us onto a really weird one. Suddenly everything wasn't funny anymore, and we went home, and we felt like really uncomfortable and boxed in this tiny room, and it was all just weird. And nothing, none of it mattered. I mean, clearly he was fine. He was alive. They found him. He probably just like got lost or something. But to us, it was like, oh shit, like what's going on? What do we have to think of this? And you can't process information logically on it. You can't just be like, all right, well, who gives a fuck? Like, there's a little boy. He's on his own. His family found him. It was nothing to do with us. We can't do anything about it. Nothing happened to him. He seemed fine. It was just like a bad vibe or whatever. You know, it's not like a real thing. And that could happen so easily, I found, because you couldn't go through the normal steps that you would go through unless you were really experienced or really just naturally like, you know, good at that. But you couldn't go through the normal process of being like, okay, what's the big deal? You know, nothing's really happened. Everything's fine. We're all alive. Everyone is fine. So it's all good. Instead, you'd sort of just sit there holding on to this like feeling. And that could be good in a way, you know, if it was like a good feeling. But if it's like a bad feeling, then you just couldn't like let go of it and shit. And I don't know, it was weird. And that would happen a lot. Like we'd be chilling. I don't remember how many. It feels like we did acid with this guy a bunch of fucking times, but I'm sure he was only there for like a weekend or something. I don't know, but there was quite a few trips we did with him in this. Because we did it we did it in a different town another time. So it would just shift very easily like that. Yeah, and then like a couple of times I would have really weird, like, I would think that something had been said or implied that hadn't, and I would get really weird, and I would just withdraw and get really quiet because I'd feel uncomfortable to express it, and then I would just be basically silent the whole night. And once you do that, you're fucked. Like, you're just going to have a really bad trip because you're sort of holding on to this thing that you're confused by or worried about, and then you have no outlet for it, and you just digest it in a really weird, fucked up way because you're tripping, and especially at the peak of the trip, you can't really be rational. So you're just like, you're not really looking at it for what it is. You're not looking this thing in the face. You've got this, like, it's like this fucking like monkey on your back or something that's like sort of terrorizing you mentally, and you can't. I don't know. I had some. The problem is with doing a video about this is they're like really hard to describe. Like, trips are like really hard to describe. They all have this specific character and a kind of. To me, they often had like a narrative, and I don't know. I think mine were quite psychotic sometimes, like quite deranged. But they're very hard to describe. They felt like premonitions, or like I was living inside someone else's life, or like everything was this weird experiment and that I was being subjected to, or I was suddenly realizing that I was not who I thought I was, and that, and it was just all weird stuff, like reality being messed with. My sense of reality and who I was and what the world around me was just being completely messed with. There was I remember a while, again, this was with this mate of mine, it was really weird to have these embarrassingly sort of weird fucked up trips around him as well, because my ex, she would freak out a lot, like, and we would have like arguments on it whilst tripping, and she would get like really freaked out, and she was not very good at sort of, she would externalize everything but not very well. Basically, I was kind of the opposite. I would just shut down and go quiet. And I remember having one where like I almost started to think I was Brian Wilson or something. It was like I felt like I was Brian Wilson. I felt like I was completely like I had fucked up my brain, and that I had like done bad things, and that my ex had to like look after me, and that she had to really strictly control everything I did, because if you know Brian Wilson's story, like he went through a lot of stuff in his life, basically, and he made a lot of bad choices, and he was surrounded by a lot of bad influences, and he seemingly did himself some damage, and other people also caused him a lot of harm. And it feels a bit now to people like maybe in his current relationship, what he does is quite strictly controlled, and quite likely that's for the best. I don't fucking know, but a lot of what he does is strictly controlled, seemingly by his wife. And maybe for his musical output, that's not so great, but in other respects, I'm sure it's, like, there's good reason for it, because he was quite out of control. But I started feeling almost like I was him or something, and I was in this situation, and I'd like fucked up, and I'd done bad, weird things, and that I needed to be like, basically like just guided around through life, like almost like I had like a carer, and she just had to like tell me what to do and be really strict with me, and I had to like not kind of speak out, and I was like just walking around with my head down, and I started repeating these like chants, these like weird little, I just kept repeating them, like something about like only do good things, and only do that, and only do this, and don't do this, and it was all like made up gibberish, but in my mind this was like, this is this code I have to live by, that I have to keep chanting these things over and over again, and like otherwise I don't know how to explain it, man. It was so fucking weird, and gradually you start to regain normality. Usually towards the end of the night you're chilling, and you've sort of already come to some kind of equilibrium in terms of, everything's quieting down a bit at least, and then when everything quietens down a bit and you're just back at home doing normal stuff like eating food or watching TV or something, you start being like, what was I on about before? Like, what exactly did I think was happening? And then I started being like, oh, maybe I'm not this Brian Wilson character. Maybe I was just being fucking weird. Maybe she was being fucking weird. Maybe nothing really happened and it was all in my head. And it's a really weird feeling coming down from it when you have such deranged kind of interpretations of what's been going on. So yeah, that stuff was happening a lot, and then we moved and we carried on doing it, and we found a way where we started taking it with Valium, because what would happen a lot, we'd have Valium around in case we needed it, and then it would get to the part of the night where things started to get weird, and we'd just always end up taking the Valium, like we'd just freak out. And one of us would be like, no, maybe we shouldn't, and the other one would be like, no, I need a Valium. Whoever was freaking out the most would like really want to take one, and the other one would be trying to kind of be like, maybe we shouldn't, but it would come out as like, don't do it, because you can't really express yourself well. So one of us would be like, I think I need a Valium, and we'd like go over and grab for it, and then the other one would be like, wait, because we didn't want to like end the trip, thinking like the other person's thinking, no, I'm having fun, let's not. And it would get kind of weird, and then it got to a point, sometimes it was like I would just get I started thinking like, if we had, like, I'm not saying you shouldn't express yourself if you have a problem on it, but like to try and talk everything through when you're on the peak of it is ridiculous, I think. And like we would try to just talk things through that didn't need to be talked through, and it got really silly. Like every time we do it, there'd be some weird thing going on, and I got to a point I just was sort of like, can we just shut up? Like, can we just put music on and just not do anything? Like, because this isn't going to help, and we just talk ourselves into craziness. Like I would often have these crazy trips where like I was thinking all this bad stuff's about to happen. Someone's going to kick the door down. I've done something. Someone's going to attack us, or everything is about to just go insane. And it was always better if I just internalized it, basically, and I would just sit there, I would just put an album on and like sit all fucking like, just like a crazy person, basically just processing it all. And she didn't like that, because she would just often just be like, it looks fucking weird, and I was like, well, so what, like just ignore it, basically. Like, I'm fine, it's just a bad trip, I'm absolutely fine. That was the thing, I guess, was like my feeling on it was like, okay, we're having a bad trip, that's fine, just have a bad trip. Whereas with her it was more like, but we're having and it was sort of like, well, okay, like you just have to accept that you're having a bad trip and just kind of just do it, and don't try, and you can't, I don't know how to explain it. It's difficult because there's an extent to which, it's good to try and, maybe communicate if it's possible, or to maybe try and alter the experience in a positive way. But there's a point where it just becomes silly, and it did become silly a lot, and it exacerbated a lot of these situations. If I don't want to sound resentful about it either, because me and her spoke about it a lot afterwards, because we had a lot of I mentioned this in the other video, but I would say, and it's not to try and point fingers, because when I talk, for example, even like in the MDMA video, like so much of that was just completely my fault, and like I subjected both of us to that. I think when it came to acid, it was kind of the other way around, like and we've both sort of agreed on it since then, that like her behavior around acid was like very inappropriate, but we've resolved it now and it's fine. But it that's hence if I sound a little bit, whatever, but it was it caused a lot of bad trips, basically, this need to control everything. And it's a useful learning experience in itself. For me, it certainly was, because I definitely got this idea of like, okay, there will come times in life where things are so overwhelming or scary or bad, and you are so powerless that all you really can do is accept that you're powerless and just remain yourself and remain still, and just hold on, and just hold on to your sanity and your internal sense of like calm as much as you can. And I was a couple of years older and had, it was easier probably for me to, but yeah, I just started to get really annoyed by it, because it was like, if I was freaking out quietly by myself, I wasn't bothering anybody, and I kept saying like, it's fine, just, I'm having some weird thoughts, but I'm just gonna have them, you know. But to her it was like, but you're being weird, and it was like, all right, sorry, but just ignore me. I'm not getting in your face, I'm not doing anything, you know. And I just wanted to kind of be alone, and when I did that, it was fine. And I would eventually process all of it. I just feel like between two people, there's so much room for misunderstanding that it's often just not worth it. So I do feel, in general, as a general principle with tripping and stuff, like if someone becomes withdrawn or quiet, I just don't think that's bad. They might not have the most fun night ever, but I think unless they want your help, I think personally it's better, really, unless it's a person who's like, they've got serious issues, in which case they shouldn't be doing it anyway, which was, it probably applied to us too, to be fair, me and my ex. But unless they want to be helped, I think it's better, really, for them to just like go and be quiet and have a bad trip, because it can happen and you can't control it. Maybe you can, but you can't necessarily control it. 1 second, I'm gonna go for a piss. Anyway, yeah. So during that later period of doing it, the sort of middle period, I guess, it was like sometimes fun. The main fun part really was music, but there were some nights that were really good. There were, you know, probably 1 out of every 5 trips would be successful. You know, we'd be like, oh, that was really fun. I often thought like we shouldn't do it again, but it was enough to justify, you know, trying again. And there were times it was quite cool. Like we were really into watching cooking shows on it, which was always really fun. Like Ready Steady. No, we didn't. Ready Steady Cook was too fucking weird to watch on acid. We used to watch the Barefoot Contessa a lot, because it was just so like inoffensive, and actually a couple of times that put us on a fucking weird one as well, though. Even it was ridiculous how easily we could get like spun into a weird trip. And we would watch Fear Factor sometimes. That was pretty funny. And eating food and shit. I remember one time we ordered, again, apologies if I don't remember what I talked about in my previous video about it, but I remember one time we ordered a takeaway and we put it into the app that we wanted it to arrive at 11:30. We were going to start tripping at like 5 or 6 or whatever, so we thought it would arrive like well into our trip, and we wanted it to arrive as late as possible. And I guess it got to like 8 or 9 p.m. or something, and we were just starting to like really trip hard. And then we just heard like, we're hearing like banging and shouting, and we're like, what the fuck is going on? I think our buzzer was broken at the time. And we're like, what is happening? And we looked out the window, and there was this lady like, hello, and so we were like, what the fuck? And I opened the window like, yeah, and she was like, I've been outside for 20 minutes. It's raining. And we were just like tripping, like, what the fuck is happening? Like, and she was like, let me in. And we just like realised like, oh, this is the lady with the food. And she had all these boxes, and she looked proper fucking weird. She was a really weird lady. And she was like freaking out, having been outside for so long. I just never forget hearing it. Like, I've been outside for 20 minutes. She was like shaking with rage. And we went down. And I was like, we asked for it to arrive at 11:30. It's not our fault, you know, like we didn't want it this early. And she was like, oh, it's not my problem or whatever. And she just, you know, it wasn't her problem. So we took the food, and it was the weirdest takeaway ever. The pepperonis were upside. They were like little bowls. Like the pepperonis had started to curl up around the edge, so they were like sort of bowl-shaped pepperonis. And then there were these fucked up chicken wings that were like black. And then the fries were just like a nightmare. I just remember all of it. It was like the worst, weirdest takeaway I've ever had in my life. It was terrible. And for some reason, we used to eat a lot of takeaways on it, which again, I didn't think was like the best thing to do. But we'd always like, yeah, just like eat loads of shit. Like there was a while where my ex was really obsessed with getting, I feel bad. I feel like I'm like talking shit about it. I'm not. it's just hard not to in the context of LSD, to be honest, because she was annoying. But she always wanted to get. She's a great person, literally like my favorite person ever. But like, yeah, she was really annoying to trip with. I should just be honest about that, really. She always wanted to get McDonald's, and early on, not at the end. You know, she would be like, right, let's go and get McDonald's now. It'll be so great. And I always think, like, really? I don't really want a McDonald's, you know. At first I kind of go along with it, like, okay, McDonald's is good, you know. I definitely liked McDonald's at the time, but it just got to a point, yeah, we'd be having milkshakes and burgers and like large fries and stuff, and it's just like, why the fuck are we having a McDonald's now? You know, every time I'd start to feel sick and I was too tired to trip anymore, and it sort of killed the trip, and I just felt weird and tired and fat. And I think this takeaway was the time where I finally put my foot down. I was like, no more fucking takeaways. Like, this is just annoying. Let's just have some food in the fridge, and when we want it, we can have it. But I'm sick of fucking stuffing myself with fast food every time we trip, you know? Because this particular meal was like really bad, and we ended up eating all of it anyway, just because it was there and it was on the counter. And yeah. So that was, you know, like, yeah. Anyway, so what was I on about? Yeah. So we would watch TV and shit, and yeah, sometimes it was good. It was really good to have sex on as well, like that was amazing. But we would often, like, during the time where we were taking it with Valium, that didn't, I mean, that sort of has a kind of counter effect a little bit. Most trips, to be fair, we didn't take it with Valium, but there was a while where we thought that was a good way of like tripping without having bad trips, and it meant that you had quite a kind of soft, boring trip, and you didn't get a lot of the good parts, but you also lost a lot of the bad parts. It was much harder to freak out. We never had like a bad trip when it was always a small dose of Valium. Yeah, but having sex on it was really good, and I think, like, really good actually. Like, probably one of the best drugs to do that on. And I wouldn't, in general, I don't know. I wouldn't say I had a lot of profound personal insights, because I felt so detached from the reality of who I was that, like, you know, I hear about people with mushrooms, and and I had this experience actually the one time I've done mushrooms. I've literally only done them once. I really want to do more. But, you know, people talk about, like, you know, realize, you know, oh, I thought about my relationships, and I thought about the way I interact with people, and on acid, to be honest, I was too, like, let me turn these off. I was too kind of detached from reality and from myself to really have that. It was just always like weird shit. I did learn things from it overall, like I said, about like letting go and stuff. And I think it broadened my mind in some weird way. I often found that when I'd go back to normal life, I know it's a cliche, but I did feel more creative and stuff. And it did coincide with a period of like massively increased creativity. And I felt, I'm sure it changed my brain in some ways, maybe some bad, maybe some good, but I didn't have a great deal of personal insight on it, basically. And we didn't have that much together. We had some really good experience listening to music. Another one was Person Pitch by Panda Bear. That's probably the most I've enjoyed music on acid. Like, we were having a really bad trip, and again, I was like, we were trying to talk about it, and I was like, look, can I just put this on? And if we don't like it, we can turn it off. But can I just put this album on? Like, I think you'll like it. And she was like, oh, I really don't want to, but okay. And I put it on. And then at the beginning of the album, it starts quite weird, and she was a bit like, and then it just, like, once it gets going, it's a fucking masterpiece, absolute masterpiece. It's one of those albums I don't listen to often, like, because it's so special. Like, I don't want to just listen to it normally, you know. Like, I feel like it's to bring out on rare occasions. Man, it is so good. It's an absolute masterpiece, and yeah, listening to that, like, was really really amazing, and it completely got rid of the bad trip. As soon as it ended, we were just like, wow, like, everything's better. That's amazing. And usually that would happen, you know, a lot of the time that would happen. Like, I remember one time we were sitting in there, and we lived next to this busy main road, Sorry, every time I say one of these things, I'm hearing an echo of me having said it in the previous video. I'm sorry if this is repetitive, but I'm just trying to go through the whole thing. I remember hearing the cars passing outside after the music ended, like, and it was just like all these cars passing. We lived on a really busy road, and it sounded so fucking nice. Like, you just hear them going like, vroom, vroom, like speeding past, and you see the lights go past the windows, and it was like so beautiful, and stuff like that was like incredible, especially just after the peak, when you're just chilling, and like it's just really nice. You have a good feeling in your body. You feel a bit less psychologically like afraid than you were before. You feel more like, okay, everything's all right now. Now it's the part where we can just kind of enjoy it. We'd like just maybe like play games or whatever, or watch things. And that was often the best part of the trip, the latter period where you've still got all that energy, but you haven't got all the crazy stuff going on in your brain. It's weird. I don't know. It's a really good value experience, like good value for money, and you really get like a lot. Like a night of tripping on acid is like you get a lot out of it. Like a lot of, I mean, as in a lot happens, and there's a lot of phases to it, and a lot of different things that you can enjoy. It's really good. It's just, it can also be really bad. And I've read quite a lot of stuff about other people's experiences, and a lot of people have had really weird, bad experiences on acid. They're a bit inexplicable and just disturbing in a strange way. It just can be disturbing. Like I had this one trip. I don't even want to talk about it in detail, to be honest, because it's embarrassing. Like, the stuff I was saying was really weird, and I was like really uncomfortable about it for ages afterwards. I now realize that there was a reason for it. It was similar to the Brian Wilson thing. Some stuff had happened earlier in the night at the beginning of the trip that kind of got in my head that I became very neurotic about, and I internalized it really weirdly, and I went completely insane, like one of those videos of a guy on PCP or something, you know, like that Wu-Tang affiliate guy who fucking cut his dick off. Yeah, what was his name? Maybe not Killer Priest, no, it's a different guy. Some guy anyway he wasn't in Wu-Tang, he was like a Wu affiliate. He took PCP and cut his own dick off, which is, yeah, I mean, that's enough to make me never take PCP. Of all the drug education at school, they should just be like, all right, look, drugs are one thing, but this guy once smoked PCP and cut his own penis off, and I think most kids would be like, all right, yeah, I'm never going to take PCP, that's fine. I can just remove that from my plans. Not that I ever really had plans to take PCP anyway. Yeah, so I went insane, and I was spouting bizarre gibberish, like it was coming from, so it was like I was possessed by a demon, and it was just one of those times I was being a bit odd, but again, she was not great at dealing with it, and it kind of exacerbated it, and I just got more and more like I just wanted to sit there and not talk about it because it was just getting weird. But then I just became demonic, basically. I feel in the same way I look back on like times of MDMA and stuff, and I feel I sort of let her down. I do feel a bit when I remember some of these nights, I do feel a bit let down because I felt I was objectified a bit for being weird. Like, she took a picture of it, for example, like of how like I was being so weird and stuff, like, and was sort of like looking at me like a bit like a zoo animal and just being angry and sort of and I think that's a shame, and I think that's a very important thing to avoid if you're in this situation, which, like, I'm sure most people watching this know that anyway, don't need me to tell them. Like, I'm not trying to like lecture people, but it's really bad, I think, to sort of dehumanize someone or separate them from yourself when they're having that kind of experience. You just got to be like chill and try and level with them, even if they're being weird and you can't really relate to them or engage with them. You should still just try and be calm and normal and nice and friendly and not make them feel like weirder. And it just kept escalating, and I was saying these crazy things, like, some of it I don't want to repeat, as I said, because it's like embarrassing, and I was so uncomfortable about it for so long afterwards. But some of it, I was just like, it was like musical. I was doing these like, and I was going like, and like saying all these words backwards and making these weird musical sounds. And then I remember this one point, like in my head, by the way, I don't remember being in the room. I was like, just like, and like, I've never tripped like this before or since. And I was seeing how the universe, this wasn't the time where I had the really bad, but actually when I think about it, it was the beginning of, it was like the genesis of that. I was seeing this stuff about the universe, and this was the first time I had this thought in my head. I've just remembered this now, because I remember after this, which I talked about in the other video, so I won't go into it in too much detail, the one about why I stopped taking LSD. I won't tell that full story again. You just watch that video if you're interested. But in that trip, I saw all this stuff about how the universe worked, and it really fucked with my head. And I'm realizing now, actually, that this night, this particularly infamous night where I started going crazy, I was seeing things kind of then, and I started superimposing all of it onto, like, I was like, oh, my family know all of this, and that's why they're depressed. And this is, now I'm learning this, and they all know this already, and I'm part of this lineage of people who know this thing and everything. And then it all became like, okay, everything's kind of, I can't, it's annoying, it's frustrating, I can't explain some of these things. They're just impossible to explain in words. But basically in my head, it was like this movie playing. It was like all this shit was going on, and I was like a conduit for it. And I remember at one point I was talking like a robot, and I was like, this is the worst episode of Black Mirror ever, and stuff, like literally like that. I was being like, and I was just like, and like making like crazy like rewind noises, and being like and just like going around like a robot and shit. And I do understand why she was uncomfortable with that. I'm not saying she should have just sat there smiling. I understand, but it escalated to that point. And I was telling her all this crazy shit. I kept talking about the olive. I kept being like, the olive. And like later on, she was like, what's the olive? I was like, I have no fucking idea what you're talking about. And she said, you wouldn't stop going on about the olive. And I remember as I came to from this, like towards the part where it was like very kind of suddenly, I was sort of like, I remember I was like cracking black pepper in her face. And she was like, what are you doing? And I was like putting black pepper on it, like out of a black pepper grinder, and it was going in her face. And I was like, yeah, what am I doing? And then I was like, she was like, what is the olive? And I was like, I don't know. I thought I was trying to find some kind of secret, or I was something, I don't fucking know. And then like, yeah, later on we were just like playing Rayman Legends and shit, and I was like, can we not talk about it, please? I don't really want to, I don't know, yeah. It was really a really weird night, and to some degree I do understand her reaction to it. Like, and she was saying that she was sort of worried she was going to have to go and get someone and like get help or like call someone, which again though it's one of those things like, why do you have to call someone just because I'm being weird on acid? You know, like, you don't have to call someone, you just accept that I'm being weird. That's the thing, because, you know, there were times where she would freak out and I'd worry. In my head, I was never like, I'd better call someone. You know, let me call her mum or something, because it was just like, why would I call her mum? What could her mum possibly do? And why would I call an ambulance? What could they possibly do in this situation? If there's a physical health risk going on, then of course, like, call them. But if someone's just being a freak and acting crazy, what the fuck is an ambulance going to do? I don't want an ambulance in there, you know, fucking acid in the house and shit. Crazy. But she was tripping as well. So yeah. This video's taken on more of a sort of personal vibe than I intended it to, or a sort of catty, bitchy vibe. I really don't mean for it to sound that way. I'm just being honest about the reality of the time. Yeah, and so there were times like that. There was another time we had a big fight, and she like stormed out because apparently I was being such a dick, and I was like chasing her through town, and I thought everything was an experiment, and all the people in town were actors, and that they were like paid to live in this town and to pretend they didn't know who I was, but that all of them knew who I was, and they were really disgusted by me and they hated me. And as I was chasing every town, they were all trying to act normal and pretend they didn't know what was going on, but they all knew exactly what was going on because I was being like observed 24/7 by cameras and shit. That happened a lot. I had a lot of trips about that, about being like experimented on, and how my parents had signed me up for this thing to go and be. It's all really weird. So anyway, yeah, it went on across living in multiple different places actually. yeah, we lived in a lot of different places, and we tripped in like all of them, and eventually it culminated in this one trip that again I mentioned in the other video. I'll link that in the description. I won't go into all of it again, but I had a really weird time, and I saw this. I sort of saw like Eternal Return or something, and I couldn't unsee it, and that actually made me uncomfortable for like a year or so. I wouldn't say it like fucked me up. Like I was mostly fine, but it was enough that like my view on life had changed, and that's quite a big thing, I guess. Like it's almost like losing your religion or something, you know. It was like I believed in kind of like life being a certain way, and suddenly it was like ripped out from underneath me, and that put me off doing it, and I haven't done it since. And I feel if me and her did it, it would probably be fine, but there's a possibility that it could be like a weird or bad time again, and I just can't be bothered. But I would like to do it again at some point in the future. I do like it. I don't entirely trust it. I'm not sure. I guess maybe part of that is kind of superstitiousness, or the fact that it's like synthesized, and it's a chemical, and it seems to feel a bit more like that than mushrooms. And mushrooms have been around for so long, and they've been used by so many like tribes and shit, and they have a more interesting history and a more storied history than LSD. So I feel, even though I have very limited experience with mushrooms, I trust them a little bit more. I'm more keen to maybe do those. But at the same time, I don't want to close the door on LSD. I have used it for candy flipping and stuff since then, which is always good. You can't really have a bad trip when you do that. It's great, but it's not the same. It's not an LSD experience, really. It's kind of a totally different thing. It's more of an enhanced MDMA experience. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I guess that's all, really, yeah. I'm interested to know other people's experiences with it, and maybe comparison with mushrooms, you know. And if anyone else had any of these absolutely mad, unexplainable trips on it. Yeah. And otherwise, yeah, cool. Thanks for watching. Hope you... by the way, actually, I realised, I think I've remembered the first time I did it. It wasn't with her. The actual first time I did it by myself, yeah, was with a friend. And that was the time I do it. I have another video I talked about a bizarre nitrous experience. Definitely the most bizarre experience I've had on drugs was doing nitrous on LSD. And that was the time. That was the first time I did it. And that was an interesting, weird, not hugely pleasant trip, but it was okay. Anyway, yeah, cool. Hope you're well, guys. Take care. Thanks for watching, as usual.